February 15th, 2012 meeting of the City of Santa Barbara Airport Commission. May we have a roll call, please?
John Clark,
Here.
Scott Tracy,
Here.
Chris Colbert,
Here.
William Gilbert,
Here.
Patricia Griffin,
Here.
Kirk Martin, Bruce Miller.
Here. Do we have any changes to the agenda?
No, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Public comment. Any member of the public may address the Airport Commission on any subject within the jurisdiction of the Commission that is not scheduled before them on the same day. The total time for this comment is 15 minutes. And I do have speaker slips, but they're all related to the naming item. Notices that the Lease Review Subcommittee met on Thursday, February the 2nd, 2012 at 11 a.m. in the Airport Administration Building. The Budget Subcommittee met on Friday, February 10th at the Airport Administration Building, and that on Friday, February 10th, the Airport Commission Secretary duly posted this agenda on the bulletin board at Airport Administration. Which brings us to the minutes. Do we have a...
I'll make a motion that we waive the reading of the minutes and approve the minutes as submitted.
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Which brings us quickly to the consent calendar. Any questions, deletions, comments?
Move for approval.
Second.
It has been, those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Getting ahead of me. And liaison reports. I see the Mayor Pro Tem of Goleta approaching.
Good evening, Chair Clark, and congratulations on your appointment. I didn't get a chance to do it last time. Of course, I didn't know who was going to get appointed, but now we know.
Neither did I.
So, and members of the commission, good evening. I really don't have much to report tonight other than to give you two significant dates for the city of Goleta. And that's on February 2nd, we celebrate our 10th year of incorporation. And July 1st, which is the next important date, because that is basically the 10th year of our revenue neutrality agreement with the county, where we will now receive 100% of our bed tax. So it will be a very strong year for us as far as additional income. Of course, the county is going to have to cough up about another $2 million, but that's what divorce agreements call for. So, but other than that, with our birthday celebration, we have things going on every month to celebrate our 10th year of incorporation, so hopefully you can participate in some of the events that are coming up. I don't have the list with me, but if you go on our website, you can find out some of the things coming up. So unless you have any questions for me, thank you very much for the time, and have a great meeting.
Thank you. Thank you. Which brings us to administrative reports. And the first item is going to be the airline terminal naming request. Go through a few ground rules here. If you wish to speak, I do need a speaker slip, which is over by the entrance. When called to speak, please say your name into the mic. You can use the podium there. The parties that submitted the request will be given 10 minutes each to speak. Other speakers, we're looking at probably 3 minutes each. And try to avoid repetitive thing. If somebody's made the point, you can agree. We'll try to save a little time. And that's, I guess, over to the airport administrator.
Okay. All right. As you know, the new airline terminal was completed this past summer and is now in operation. And Since then, the city administrator has received two unsolicited, requests from citizens to name the airline new terminal for local individuals who have made significant contributions to the community. The city does have a policy and procedure for this type of situation. It's laid out in the Municipal Code, Chapter 22.48. This was adopted in 1971. I guess up until that time, there was really no consistent policy, and council felt like there was a need to give guidance and establish a policy. So it lays out how requests are received, and they are received by the city administrator, who then, make sure they kind of follow the guidelines in terms of the request, and then forwards them on to the commission or committee for the department where the facility is located. City parks have many parks that are named for people, and I just gave some examples in the guidelines. And probably many of those were made before 1971, so I'm sure there's some history to some of them that may have driven council to at least establish some consistent guidelines. The requests that the city administrator received, the names proposed were submitted by Mr. Staten, who is the president of the Santa Barbara County Bar Association, and Mr. Edward Hartfeld. Mr. Staten has recommended or requested that the terminal be named for John Ricard, and Mr. Hartfeld for the terminal be named for Dwight Murphy. I went through the criteria in the staff report and then just summarized kind of what I felt were the qualities about each individual that were consistent with the policy established by City Council. And then you also received the packet with more detailed information. Both individuals are, contributed greatly in their time that they were active in the community, and many of their contributions are long-lasting. I won't go through each individual one. I know that the two parties will want to speak on their recommendation. There's some other criteria that is in the municipal code that talks about a proliferation of names on different parts of the same facility, and advising that should be avoided. The original airline terminal was built in 1942. It was expanded twice, and then in 1969, the council renamed it from the Santa Barbara Air Terminal to the Earl Ovington Terminal. In the airline terminal project, of which the new terminal is part, as well as includes the parking and roadway and the relocation and rehabilitation of the 1942 terminal, which it has now been moved into its permanent location. It hasn't been lowered onto it yet. And it is joined to the new terminal facility, so it's all one complex, by a courtyard and a fountain, and will contain the services of our airline terminal parking office, as well as our security operations center, and then the base of the iconic tower will be a history display. So it calls into question about having one facility, the 1942 terminal, designated as the Earl Ovington Terminal, and then a building just not very many feet away designated another name. I'm not sure that that's consistent with the policy that is in the municipal code. Although in the airline terminal planning, the many years of planning and design, it was never contemplated that the terminal be named. which doesn't mean that, council can't, or you or council can't consider that at this time. My suggestion is that you might want to consider in making your recommendation either to make a recommendation to council that the new terminal should not be named, as it's inconsistent with the historic terminal, which is already named, or you make a determination that the council name the new airline terminal and provide the name and alternatives, and find that the name is consistent with Municipal Code Chapter 22.48. Another alternative action may be to consider that council make the recommendation that council should not name the terminal. However, if council decides they have a desire to, that a process should be established to consider the names, those that are already submitted, and then see if there are any other names that come from the community that should be considered, and have some process for determining what that name should be. If having to choose between the two names tonight, I mean, they're both very deserving and individuals who've made significant contributions to the community, and I don't know how you decide with one without making, the others' contributions maybe seem less. I'm not sure. But I do think that if the city does want to consider naming the terminal, that a process should be broadened. And those are basically my comments. The rest, the details, I will let each of the parties, I think they can represent the people that they are requesting better than I.
Thank you. Anybody, any questions regarding so far? Okay. Well, I guess we'll open the floor for some discussion here.
Oh, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
May I say, I received an email from Barbara Lowenthal supporting the naming of the terminal for John T. Ricard, and I provided a copy to you there.
Thank you. We need our number machine here, I think. Okay, in no particular order, let's start with Mr. Hartfeld.
My name is Edward A. Hartfeld, and I want to make an apology, first of all. I've given presentations many times on Dwight Murphy, and I've always read from a script because there's been so much detail of importance in his history that I didn't want to go home at night and start dreaming about the important things I left out. So I apologize in advance, but I read from a script. But I've timed it, and it comes out to about 10 or 12 minutes, so I should fit within your guideline pretty well. Many have asked how I came to undertake a 6-year-long research project on Mr. Dwight Murphy. To make a long story short, the Park Department asked me for its 2001 centennial celebration to tell the story of my father's superintendency of the Parks and Recreation Department from 1930 to 1935. In the process, I discovered my father's files from the period still existed, and in delving through them, discovered that the far, far more important story was that of Mr. Dwight Murphy. So much so that it seemed it would be akin to criminal neglect to not make known the extraordinary and seemingly endless facts concerning Murphy's mostly behind-the-scenes leadership of Santa Barbara's post-1925 earthquake renaissance as a Spanish-themed city, internationally recognized today, in large part for the beauty and romantic ambience Murphy and a small handful of his associates produced. That history simply must be preserved, and your commission has the opportunity to play a major part in doing just that. You will learn in the next few minutes how he achieved this with so little public notice. Having reviewed the municipal code pertaining to the naming of public buildings, excuse me, I believe that the name Dwight Murphy far exceeds its requirements. Interestingly, both with respect to Santa Barbara and the state of California. Paragraph A states what appears to be the principal criterion, namely, I quote, names which commemorate the culture and history of Santa Barbara will be given first priority. Those names commemorating California history may be given second priority. That first priority part bears special emphasis here tonight. Names which commemorate the culture and history of Santa Barbara will be given first priority. Dwight Murphy's record of contributions can clearly be said to easily exceed that primary requirement. And for the second priority, California history, Murphy's contributions both in the equestrian and humanitarian fields under several governors were quite extraordinary indeed. Santa Barbara benefiting greatly in both cases. But on the local level, he accepted leadership and or participated in virtually every civic activity of any significance for over 40 years, unstintingly utilizing his organizational genius, his dedication and generosity, and friendship for all he encountered regardless of religion, politics, social status, or ethnic background. These are the ingredients of success for any civic understanding of such magnitude. Paragraph B of the code stipulates, I quote, particularly meritorious and outstanding contributions over a period of several years to the general public interest or the interest of the city. Mr. Murphy's meritorious and outstanding contributions to the city commenced in 1919 and continued mostly anonymously, which some would say in itself is an astonishing thing, unabated until his passing in 1968. As his biographer, who devoted several years, those years made necessary by his passion for anonymity, of research plus writing and talking in a variety of media genres, the centerpiece of which is the book, California's Night on a Golden Horse, Dwight Murphy, Santa Barbara's Renaissance Man. The research, of course, delved into the entire refounding and development of our amazing city and its contributions of the area. I should say contributors of the area. And I can state without question that Mr. Murphy was the driving force behind the unparalleled renaissance of Santa Barbara that only just began with the great earthquake of 1925. How can one person do so much anonymously, you say? With some ease. If your very closest friend and associate is the monopolist of the local news, Tom Stork by name. Obviously, some of Murphy's good works necessarily found their way into the public domain. In addition to the 1,300 copies of California's Night on a Golden Horse that have been sold, the Dwight Murphy story has been documented in a double notitious, the quarterly, which turned out to be half a year instead of quarterly, historical publication of the Santa Barbara Historical Museum. I believe you have received copies of both documents, and you will find California's Night was endowed wholeheartedly by the endorsement of Dr. Kevin Starr, the undisputed greatest living historian on California, and also California State Librarian Emeritus, who wrote the book's foreword. In addition, oral and computerized slide presentations based on the book have been given to an estimated 2,000 attendees of meetings of many of Santa Barbara's most important institutions, plus some 10 or so service clubs. Incidentally, I noted that language of the Municipal Code, Section E, does not specifically preclude two adjoining structures, and these structures are not exactly adjoining, from being dedicated separately. The city administrator has agreed, but that was some months ago, and the two structures are distinctly different in character and in purpose. While there is a small recreational field that was dedicated to Mr. Murphy on the east side of town in 1933, considering the vast number of significant contributions made by him since 1933, it no longer is appropriate, period. Knowledgeable people might easily regard it as a disgrace, as a memorial for Mr. Murphy. Considering such things as his kickstarting as chairman of the Board of Park Commissioners from 1927 to 1932, the breakwater construction, and the quadrupling of the developed park system, including the Bird Refuge and Palm Park and the entire East Beach area, which was previously virtually unusable most of the time, he resigned to, among a great many other things, take charge of the depression unemployment relief programs for the entire state of California. In that position, he funneled enough funds for the park superintendent to have as many as 500 men at a time at his disposal to develop, starting with the Bird Refuge, by far the most parks, acreage, and tree-lined street mileage in the history of the city. The Dwight Murphy Field dedication story is another example of his extreme modesty. As Mr. Murphy's successor as Parks Commission chairman, Ralph T. Stevens and the park superintendent, who happened to be my father, secretly arranged the ceremony dedicating the field to Murphy. Considering his well-known disdain for publicity, it is unlikely Murphy knew of the dedication part of the ceremony until it was too late for him to challenge it, as he did without fail when numerous attempts were made to honor him over the years. The dedicatory plaque is only a small, innocuous wooden sign, unlikely to even be noticed by most people. Only late in life did he begin to relent to some extent, such as when he accepted the Man of the Year award at age 70 in 1953. Section E of the code does not prohibit the naming of a second facility at the same, just wrote down, it's just in at the last minute, same site. If you have had California's Night on a Golden Horse, you no doubt came away with the conviction that the Earl Warren Showgrounds very clearly should have been named for Murphy, who had helped start the horse show, which, due to his success in overseeing the shows over many years, was able to fund the showground seed money to buy the land, which included today's municipal golf course, and virtually made the Fiesta the country's outstanding equestrian event, and kept both institutions financially viable during both the Great Depression, which only those that lived through it could appreciate for its severity. Today's recession is a picnic by comparison. And through World War II. In the equestrian realm, between 1942 and 1958, he capped all this off by cleaning up the, at the behest of Governor Earl Warren, the horribly corrupt racing industry as chairman of the board of the Horse Racing Commission, which also breathed new life into the state fair system, with which our showgrounds became a part. He was fought mercilessly at first by the track owners, but when they discovered far more patrons attended the tracks after the cleanup, they praised him in writing, in glowing terms. I possess those letters, as well as many other documents left behind by Mr. Murphy.
Excuse me, we're a little over 10 minutes now.
It's going to take another 2 or 3 minutes. If you think that this is not an important enough issue to allow me another 2 or 3 minutes, I'm sorry. With the commission's approval, I'll go another 3 or 4 minutes. There's just so much to digest on this thing, and it's such an important issue that I beg your assuming you have read both books and the other documentation furnished to you on Murphy, I will end the redundancy here by concluding with some more general ideas about the importance of memorializing those responsible for making Santa Barbara the internationally known city it is today, attracting many visitors whose first impression of it comes when they arrive at our beautiful new terminal. The issue of an enlarged version of the beautifully dramatic and thematically appropriate Spanish equestrian statuette of Murphy for the front of the terminal is an issue for another day, should you elect to dedicate the terminal to Mr. Murphy. However, the original statuette is also available for display within the terminal. It is in my possession and could be gifted to the city. The value of history of the future is incalculable. That's a proven fact, no doubt. For example, the truism of the saying, those that fail to understand history are doomed to relive past failures. The purpose of memorials is not simply to commemorate a dead past. It is to take out something vibrant from that past to inspire those in the here and hereafter. There is a serious question in the minds of many longer-term Santa Barbarans if such inspiration is alive and well today. With memorialization, we come face to face with great men and women of the past and ponder and hopefully emulate their greatness. On April 2, 1968, a Santa Barbara News Press editorial accorded Dwight Murphy an obituary tribute which concluded with the following, I quote, "The monuments he built for posterity, both tangible and intangible, will last for generations. Without them, this would be a less beautiful, less prosperous, and less lively community." Once in 1953, he was named Santa Barbara's Man of the Year. He was, in fact, as much as any local resident, the man of the century, close quote. Hopefully, an appropriately scaled memorial to Murphy, such as the beautiful terminal you have created, will inspire future generations to understand and appreciate his amazingly varied contributions and moral principles, as well as the extraordinarily selfless nature of the small handful of citizens that very fortunately came together under his leadership at just the right time in our history to create this exceptionally colorful, romantic, and vibrant city that is internationally recognized because of those values. I have more to say, which is all covered in the book, which I believe you received, California's Night on the Golden Horse, and the double notices, plus a couple of letters, one of which appeared in the Santa Barbara News Press. And so I leave it to you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Moving right along. Max Staton.
Members of the Commission, thank you very much for allowing me to speak for a few minutes. My name is Max Staton. I'm the immediate past president of the Santa Barbara County Bar Association, and I've been a lawyer here in town since I came here in 1984. I've raised my kids here, and I'm a citizen of the city. I've flown out of this airport and flown back in countless times. There isn't another town like this anywhere in the country, including my hometown of Pueblo, Colorado, which also received an airport from the Army Air Corps, that has an airport like this and is serviceable. It's absolutely the greatest airport in the world, and I've just appreciated it beyond measure. But I've also probably taken it for granted. And you hear people talk about the airport and how they do take it for granted. How did it get here? I also had the privilege when I first came here that my two senior partners, Art Hensel and Tom Mullen, introduced me to Jack Ricard. In the legal field, Jack Ricard is one of the lawyers that your senior partner said, do the way he does it. Do it the right way. Do it the honest way. Be right, be good for your clients, but do it the right way. And he was held in that regard as a lawyer by members of the bar. As a judge, he became a mentor to judges. He heard every case, small, large, heard every man's case, criminal or civil. He was the judge's judge. And he would take the most difficult of cases, cut to the core, and get a solution that everyone could live with. And so he has always been held in very high regard by the legal profession. What I didn't know until last year, and was told by my friend John Reyes, and then I looked into it myself, is the unique history that Judge Ricard shares with the airport. The history is a little spotty with me because I'm new to it. Jack Ricard never told anybody about things he accomplished. But here's the story. It came time for the Army Air Corps to turn the airport over to somebody. And the word has it, the county didn't want it.
It's the Marine Corps.
You know, my dad was Army. Sorry, but Marine. Okay. but the city was in a position where they would like to have it. But they couldn't annex it because there was no contiguous land. So Judge Ricard, as a lawyer, came up with an idea using existing law to run a strip of land that comes down into the water by Santa Barbara, 4.5, 5 miles down the beach, actually 6.1. I've swam it. Come all the way up the beach and then go back inland and envelop the airport. It was brilliant. And it accomplished what needed to be accomplished for this airport to become under city control and begin serving the city as it's always done. The legislature in Sacramento was shocked by this. They were worried about the powers of city and granting cities too much power to do this. And very soon thereafter passed laws that prohibit cities from doing this. It's a great story. And I didn't know what this story was. But what it provided was the impetus and a city that needed an airport to build what we have here. And there's no better airport in the world. Can you think if for some reason the airport idea had died? Maybe it became just a general aviation airport and we didn't have commercial flights. For years, we'd all, and to the end of the future, we'd be going down to Burbank or Los Angeles or Ventura or maybe San Luis Obispo, but we wouldn't be flying out of here because nobody is able to build airports anymore. This was serendipitous. It was so lucky for us, but we profit from it every day as citizens. It's just great. I know about the code and the idea that you don't rename things, and I remember coming out here with the kids and seeing the little stone and plaque out in front of the old terminal for Mr. Ovington. And I was so pleased to hear that that part of the building plus the tower are going to be preserved and used and made a part of the new airport. And I think that's great, and I think you can continue that. But this new terminal, which I've also used, is magnificent. It's so easy. It's wonderful for every citizen in the community. It's going to go on for a long time. But if a really bright, good, honest lawyer who became a great judge and a great mayor had not thought of a way for the city to step in at that time, I'm not sure we'd have it. And so after I heard from John, I sounded out my fellow board members and members of the bar, judges, universally, what a wonderful idea. No one realizes this story took place. No one really appreciates except the very people he worked for, represented, his friends, his family, realized what a wonderful guy he was and what a wonderfully honest guy he was, and good judge and good mayor. So I think this is great. I think it'll work perfectly to have Mr. Ovington's name and plaque outside the traditional building and the new one there. And if there's anything else that I can do, work going into the future, if the commission wants to put this over and study it, I'd be happy to answer any questions at any time. Give me a call. And thanks for letting me speak to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Anthony Gunterman.
Good evening, and thank you for letting me appear. My name is Anthony Gunterman, more frequently known as Tony, and I'm here because I'm the sole living member of Jack Ricard's council. And I'm familiar with what has been said already, so I don't want to repeat that. But I do want to urge the commission to think seriously about naming the terminal after Jack Ricard. From what you've already heard, the airport would not be part of the city unless Jack Ricard had had this great idea which he carried forward and which the court subsequently upheld. And as pointed out, the legislature was shocked, so they said it couldn't do it anymore. But Jack, as a city attorney, was very effective, and then he became mayor. And I served with Jack as mayor, and I have to repeat what was said before. Here was a man that learned how to listen, and he would listen and think and evaluate, and it was surprising to me how many times he came up with the right answer. And when I say the right answer, many times those people who didn't think he was right finally wound up accepting what he took as advice. And I think he was a man of great integrity, had a good sense of humor, and a great imagination. Because without that imagination, many of the things that he did would not have happened. He was mayor shortly after World War II. And as you probably are aware, many things during World War II were postponed. You couldn't get equipment, you couldn't get materials, you couldn't get labor. And then also after World War II, the migration to California was just staggering. There was as many as 50,000 people a day came through the Southern California entry to California. So the city was faced with not only repairing what had been postponed, but accommodating the future. And Jack Ricard did a very good job in leading the city in that. In addition, he had foresight to realize that the city was going to grow. And I remember he came back from a conference of mayors in Florida with information that had been gleaned from a survey made of all cities. And he advised us that he had learned that the per capita cost of running a government was never got bigger until you got to a population of 400,000. So Jack felt that it would be wise if Santa Barbara could be from Montecito to Goleta. But of course, different people had different opinions, and that's, we now have Goleta, we now have, well, Montecito is still unincorporated. But it was things like that that he brought to the desk. And I know our council meetings ran sometimes as late as midnight because there were so many issues. Has all of you received copies of the report from Mr. Stanton? Yes. Okay, well then I won't repeat some of those. But you'll see in there that there were many, many things that Jack Ricard did and made the city I think he made the city what it is today because he was looking ahead. I have a story to tell on him, however. Traffic was getting pretty heavy after the war, and our streets were narrow streets. So the city council felt we ought to put in one-way streets. But Jack did not agree with that at all. And so one time when he was ill, he didn't come to a meeting, we voted in the one-way streets. Well, he wasn't happy with that, but what made him really unhappy was when he forgot and went the wrong way and got a ticket. Yeah. But I would like to respond a little bit to Ms. Ramsdale's recommendations. As regarding Dwight Murphy, I knew Dwight Murphy. My office was adjacent to his, and he was a real fine gentleman, and he did a lot of things for the city of Santa Barbara. However, I think most of what he did didn't impact the airport. It impacted other parts of the city. And one of the major things was the preservation of the beaches. He and several other men got together and put up funds to hold the property for the city until the city could vote a bond. And that is why we today have beautiful beaches. And I think it would be far better to have his name attached to the beach instead of calling it East Beach. Call it Murphy's Beach or Dwight's Beach, something like that. Because the impact of what he did there relates more to Santa Barbara than what he did for the airport. Not to belittle what he did for the airport, but I think the emphasis would be here, not there. And I'd like to also speak to Ms. Ramsdale's recommendation. Oh, no, discussion about Earl Ovington. Earl Ovington, as you know, is a very important pilot, airport man. Not in our airport, but I mean aviation industry. He was very important, and he lived in Santa Barbara, And I remember looking at his airplane when it was on a dirt strip of Samarkand area. But what he did was really more to the interest of the industry, the aviation industry, than it was particularly for Santa Barbara. I have no quarrel with his name being where it is, and I also looked up the definition of proliferation, and I don't believe that you could really call it proliferation if you named the new terminal after Jack Ricard and leave Earl's name where it is. You've already been told about how Jack was responsible for getting the annexation to the city of Santa Barbara. Now, why was that important? In Jack's foresight, looking to the growth of the community after the war, he felt that we needed to have a good airport, and we ought to have a plan for the airport. So a plan was developed, and Jack carried it to the county supervisors, and the county supervisors weren't interested. They said no. So then Jack realized that if something was going to be done with the city, because there was no city of Goleta at that time, he felt that the city of Santa Barbara should annex the airport and therefore manage what can be done with it. Because it was in those days that commercial transportation was just starting. Because I remember going out to the airport and watching United Airlines DC-3 come into town. That was really exciting. My connection with the airport and my interest in it goes further than that. When the city first acquired land, I think it was about 800 acres, I was a Boy Scout, so I was going to earn a merit badge in surveying. So my dad dropped me off at the airport in the morning, and he picked me up in the afternoon, and I walked all over that place trying to survey the airport. But that has nothing to do with this issue, I realize, but it brought memories back. So I think that Jack was right in seeing that it was necessary for someone to be in control of the airport. And accordingly, all the things you've already read and heard came about. I would urge your commission to think seriously about naming the airport after Jack Ricard. And with all due respect to Dwight Murphy, he did lots of things. But I think it would be much greater if his name was attached to something more closely related to the things that are in Santa Barbara directly. I thank you.
Thank you. Bill Redding.
Good evening, Airport Commission and staff. Karen and Hazel and I are acquainted with presentations to my Lions Club about this wonderful airport expansion and the building and everything that has gone on. I don't think the public understands this is a self-supporting enterprise. You know that. Nobody else does. They think that there's some sort of tax money involved, and it's actually coming right out of their pocket when they buy a ticket. And so congratulations to all of you, and thanks for serving. I've been a volunteer just about all my life. And one of my prime voluntary experiences was to be El Presidente of the Fiesta of 1986. Roger, when were you Presidente? 71? 91, yeah, okay. Aaron Graffey is on the Fiesta Committee. Jack Ricard was a Presidente in 48 and 49. He came by that so honestly because his father, James, was the first parade chairman in 1924. Jack is a authentic native son. He has ancestors in the graveyard right next to the mission. He's an outstanding native son, and beyond that, as he came along, he became a distinguished member of the greatest generation. Jack was a Navy officer, the rank of commander. His brother, I'm not sure what his rank was, but his brother was unfortunately on the USS Franklin, the carrier that was bombed off Okinawa in 1945 and lost his life. And there's just a quick little story, if I may. We just commemorated the Marine aviator who trained here, Ken Linder, trained here, and he was the last plane off the carrier to nail the bomber. So he nailed the bomber. I don't think he knew Ricard, but anyhow, I'm sure he did when he came here for a long career as a stockbroker, as I was. Anyhow, when Jack came back from his command in the Navy, he understood that those guys, the greatest generation, got stuff done. They didn't just sit around. There was a whole lot, and think of what they accomplished in the 40s. 2 major organizations, and we overcame them. And he said, why can't I? And he came back. I guess he had his law degree by that time. By heritage, he came into our fiesta, which had a couple of postponements during the war. People just wanted, some people said, why not just drop it? He came in, he revitalized our fiesta, of which Dwight Murphy had been a past presidente way back, and brought in several innovations. And let's see, among those, oh yeah, the Flower Girls was one. They were doing the show at the mission, but a lot of things. And trading on that, he got elected as the mayor, or rather the city attorney. And at that time, Pearl Chase and Tom Sork were pretty much running things. And Jack was the lead guy to see to it that East Beach didn't look like Summerland with all those oil wells. He was the one that crafted all of the regulations that kept the oil way out, so that the only industry of this town was tourism and lima beans. I mean, there wasn't anything else. And so as mayor, as attorney, he recognized, you know what, the city owns, what is it, 6-7 miles out there? You know what we could do? Because the supervisors, they're afraid of an airport, and the rural few farmers of Goleta, they couldn't handle an airport from the Marine Corps. And so he ran a line out there to annex this airport for the city. And that's how come we're as great a destination as we are. Then he got elected as mayor. He extended the limits of the city, took in all of Hoff Heights that had been the big military R&R hospital. That's the golf course. That's Earl Warren Showgrounds. That's the Adams School, and those were mostly his ideas. And then, as Mr. Staten pointed out, he became one of the most distinguished judges of California and served for a long time. And my connection with Jack Ricard, you may remember, in 1985, 86, there was a great big hoo-ha all over the country about liability insurance. And the first thing we heard about liability insurance at Fiesta was the premium was going to be $100,000. $100,000. We never spent more than $2,000 or $3,000 on liability insurance to cover all of us. And Jack Ricard, past presidente, was the first one to me. It was my year. And he said, stay with it. You can do this thing. The public will get behind you. And he'd been out of, I think maybe he was a sitting judge at that time, but he'd been out of Fiesta for a while. But he was right, and he corralled a lot of people to come in and re-support Fiesta. So there he was. He was Presidente. He was the mayor. He was the attorney. He was the mayor, Superior Court judge. And there's a whole host of other things that Jack Ricard did. But the main thing he did that you're interested in, we've got an airport, and it should be named, the building should be named for Jack Ricard, because there wouldn't be any airport without Jack Ricard. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
I would like to say that I don't like to see this made a debating society, but the 3-minute rule has been abused, and we've gone for over 30 minutes on Mr. Ricard, and I was allowed like 12 minutes, and I was just like 2 or 3
You were allowed nearly 20, and it's per person, so I've been giving them more time.
Oh, well, I understood that other people that had not filed to address this issue were only allowed 3 minutes.
That was the original agreement, but since you went over, I just thought I'd spread it a little.
If the books are carefully read, you'll see a lot of discrimination between what has been said here tonight and what actually happened.
Aaron Graffey?
Good evening, commissioners, staff, Hazel, Karen. I love the airport. I guess I could say I practically grew up here my whole life. My father was a corporate pilot. My father was a private pilot. And what brought us to Santa Barbara was he was a test pilot. So GE had some kind of program out here. I can't tell you what it was because I was preschool. But anyhow, that's how I ended up here. And later on, when I was an adult, I had SBA as a client, Joe Hesselin. So really what I first want to say is congratulations on an incredible new building. Trying to get anything built in Santa Barbara is is an act of God, and that's just to put plywood in the ground. And you had the Coastal Commission, you had the state, you had the federal. I mean, it's mind-boggling to think, it's mind-boggling to think that it's finished and it's done. And anyway, bravo. And in connection with that, it's a significant building, so that's why we turn to that, because this is something that attracts people's attention. There's probably just a couple things that I just want to highlight. As a historian, I think it is really, really important to recognize people, that when we have things named for people, because first of all, it's memorialization and a tribute to that particular person and their deeds, but also because it is inspiring for other people to read that. When we see something like Parma Park, well, what is Parma Park? Well, then you discover there was the Parma family. They donated the land. Who were they? How long were they here? And by the way, I have their whole history if you want to know that. Several things have been said about Dwight Murphy, and by the way, I do recognize that he was a very significant player when the airport was very first created in 1938. He was working with the JCs. He was also head of the business community and started the bonds and to put that together. So he does have an important role there. And of course, he was very important in the city, and we did have on the East Beach side, and also his work with the changing it to a freshwater pond from the yucky former bird refuge when it was still salt water, and that was a lot to do with everything with Dwight Murphy being head of the rec department. The Recreation Commission, the Parks and Recreation Commission. But we do have a major piece of landscape down there, property, named for Dwight Murphy, and he is worthy. Both of these guys, you can't take away from them. Both of these are phenomenal people. They had great respect, knew one another, and had great respect for one another. Dwight Murphy was almost exactly 30 years older than, 30 and a half years older than Ricard. And incidentally, they lived right in the same neighborhood. They were about 6 houses apart, this way to this way. And the house in the middle was the Parma house, and that's the house I grew up in, where my parents are still there. So I knew both of those gentlemen, but I can't sound too friendly because I was this, this high when I knew them. What I would like to highlight is not so much all the accomplishments of Jack Ricard, which you've got records of, and all these nice things, but rather to tie in something significant about his work with the airport, which I don't think has been brought up, which was when this was created and when he did all this special legal mumbo-jumbo to connect that, it wasn't just so, oh, yes, the city can have this nice property and have the airport. The city did go out and raise the money, raise the bonds, got the stuff, and tried to give it to another entity because it wasn't in the city limits. Nobody would take it. And if you might have read the article that I've written in conjunction with the history of the news press, I won't detail that now, but if you're interested, I can get that for you. So the problem is nobody would take that, including the county. The more significant problem was coming into the 50s, we couldn't make any improvements on the airport because of the county. So I was reading back in a whole lot of the history. We had the Lockheed Lodestars, the DC-3s, the DC-4s are coming in. You know when the aviation changes, you've got to change your airport to accommodate the larger planes. The DC-5s were next, and the county would not allow the city of Santa Barbara to make those improvements. He also came out with that airport master plan, which also was not going to be supported by the county, as you heard. That was one of the places where he was putting in, both for the harbor that he developed, master plan, and the airport, and to make those enterprise zones. So here we are today in this great, the job that Karen's doing, and being here at this meeting because of Jack Ricard. So I think what we would like to do is really to be in partnership with you or work with you on the process? Can we keep the conversation going to look at these kinds of things, because we think it's important to have him memorialized. It makes sense on this building because there's a good connection with that. And I think that's what we're interested in, is if we can keep the conversation going and seeing what that process might look like. I know it takes time. There's still a lot of more things that you want to do to the airport. But anyway, A, congratulations. B, that's what we'd like to say. And C, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Everybody's been sitting here taking notes. Discussion?
Any more speakers?
No more speakers.
I'd like to say thank you to the speakers. It's fascinating, and I do appreciate all of your time. Interesting how history entwines people and the connections. Thank you very much as we continue this process.
I'll do those comments. I'm, personally fascinated with the history. I've made the history of the airport a subject of an earlier educational effort. Spent many hours researching newspapers and a lot of the familiarity here tonight. It's nice to hear other people talk about it. And I appreciate the merits of both of these gentlemen. And frankly, I just, it's awe-inspiring to, hear this history. I think about two individuals who accomplished so much, and notwithstanding other people in this community who've provided a great deal as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
I think there's no questioning the tremendous contributions that both of these individuals have made to the community and the airport, the whole region, and just some priceless recollections of what they've contributed. That said, this is probably the single most significant public works project the city of Santa Barbara has created outside of maybe the water treatment plant or something like that. It's a huge thing, and all of us certainly have a lot of feelings about it. And it's wonderful to have awareness raised of some of the contributions of these two individuals, and certainly we know that there's an awful lot of other individuals that have contributed so much to the community. But I mean, these are two stellar examples, and it's great that awareness is being made. I have kind of just almost a structural issue with the ordinance as it is, because I think it anticipates a singular request for naming. How simple that would be. We say, well, yeah, this is great, and it's not a competition. I personally almost feel that, I don't feel qualified in a way to judge one's contribution to the other. I think it's something that it certainly needs broader discussion. I sort of feel like it's kind of above our pay grade at this point because of the significance, one, of this structure and its effect on the community, which includes Goleta as well. And I don't think that we've really heard the feelings of Goleta. I could imagine that there could be some differing feelings about the construct that brought it into being today. Certainly that wasn't an issue when it was done. But I personally would like to see the dialogue go forward, as Ms. Graffi suggested, and that would help raise awareness of the contributions of both of these incredible individuals. And I personally feel like it's something that perhaps the City Council should be discussing more at length, and perhaps looking for other opportunities. Unless we're going to have a hyphenated name on the terminal, I think both of these individuals deserve recognition with facilities that really are fitting to them to honor their contributions. So that's my personal opinion. I think it's a tremendous thing we're being asked to do.
Well, I would just like to thank all of you for coming and speaking so adamantly about the people that you're in support of. Santa Barbara is a very special place in that we've had some phenomenal people that have participated in its being and continues to. And as a native Santa Barbaran, it makes me proud. And I thank you. And this is going to be a very difficult process to undertake. And it's going to continue from here, I'm sure. And so thank you.
Again, I'd like to thank you all, too. Very impressed with the histories of these people. I have to confess I'm more of an air buff. An airport and airplanes, Ovington is very dear to me. Back in the old days of props, I wasn't there, but I watched my grandparents and them fly around in crates that I wouldn't even get near today. The first airmail, these are very important, as well as these people, Picard and Murphy. It was almost 30 years before they even got around to naming the president of the old airport. But there's two things I'd like to know, and one of the comments made was that the city administrator agreed that they were two separate buildings. Since this is policy done by the city council, I'd like the city council to agree that that's really what they're agreed to that. These are two separate buildings. Because one person could say something, then we present something, it can be something else. And the other is develop some kind of a process, because like I said, I'm an air buff, other people are more for the ground. So what do? We need a good process to help us weight this. And some to do that, and that's something. Now, my biggest problem, though, is that we have a new airport terminal. We're still working on it. There's bugs that iron out of it. There's all things going on. There's still significant airport. Staff still continues, has to run the airport. There's also the new master plan that's come up. This is putting a burden on staff. And they've got to do this all between furlough days. So I'm not pressed to name this thing right now. I'd like to see it go to a little more confirmation or agreement with the city council on what we really want to do. In fact, if I had my own way, I'd put a 2-year moratorium on it, because there's a lot to be done just to keep things going. And staff is limited. We can't hire a lot more people. We can't do things, and things are getting cut. But I appreciate everything that's said and done, and I wouldn't know how to pick right now. I'd have to develop some kind of process with weight. I wasn't here for Mr. Picard or Mr. Murphy, but I did read a lot on the grabbing of the, depending on which side of the fence you're on about grabbing it. However, I understand from LAFCO there's also some going back to a capability of doing that, because there's lands outside of the cities, various cities that need to be part of a city. I think they were jails, to be truthful with you, but that's what's... So anyhow, I don't know how to make a motion, if this is the case, John, if you wish me to, that we go forward with it in the sense of getting confirmation of the policy that we can have two separate buildings there, and confirmation of a process by the city or somebody.
I don't know if that's really a motion or just something here, but get it back to, we can't do anything unless we get a process. But I hate to see us doing it right now because of all the other things. If the city would want to take it up, that's fine. But we're limited staff-wise.
Chris?
Yeah, I'm just going to add to this. There's an assumption here, an underlying assumption, that there's a need to name the building. Now, because there's been a lot of references to processes, and so, you know, the question at hand is, A, do we want to name the building? Is there a compelling reason to? And if so, what's that process? You know, we can look at the policy aspects of this. So the question before us is really, is the building worthy of being named? Do we want to go into that process? So that's, I think, the question at hand tonight. And if we're not prepared to answer that tonight, then we can defer that. But that's just my personal outlook on this.
Well, and on that point, in fact, the policy section, the last section on the hearing, is that we shall hold a public hearing to consider, my words, A, the necessity or desirability of naming the facility, and then B, the proposed name and any alternatives. So it would seem, as you said, that the first issue is there a necessity or desirability? I'm not certain that we've heard even from the city council. Perhaps we have. I mean, the policy as it stands today is they just kind of punt it down to us. And,
where'd you read that?
Well, Mr. Chair, they punted to you for a recommendation to them.
Right, yes.
The buck still stops with them.
I share the feeling that wording of necessity is interesting. I can't find any necessity to name it. I mean, yes, we have people that we can honor. They are both very interesting people that had a lot to do with the city. But necessity, I'm not sure. I mean, it sounds kind of like we have this big square blank nameless building, and it's not. It says right on it what it is. It's the Santa Barbara Airport Terminal. So I'm dealing with, is there necessity? Is there a reason to do this or not?
That seems to be the nuts and bolts of the issue. That comes before all of the great presentations we just heard. In the proliferation of names for different parts of the same facility should be avoided. How do you define that facility? And if it's already named? I would like to have heard another presentation on Ovington. Because I don't know enough about that person. And that might open up another dimension to this conversation.
I can return next time.
That would be very...
Our resident historian will take care of it.
There are also many others besides Ovington that are very well known with the air business. You might even look at Lockheed.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Mr. Chair? Mr. Chair? If they're going to speak, they should come up to the podium, please, and be recognized.
Yes.
Well, we're informal, but not that informal.
Yeah, I think it's important not to focus too much on this proliferation of names issue and whether or not it's one facility or two buildings. I don't think that's really the key issue here, and I would hate for people to think that the only reason we might not do it is because part of it has a name already. I don't think that's the most significant issue here to be focusing on.
Well, what kind of a motion do we want here? Something that postpones it for a 2-year moratorium, like I suggested? The reason I say that gives a chance to get staff and all these other things done, plus the master plan. I know it puts off some of these things that people would want, but unless we put a date to something or say leave it up to the city council, you just can't let it keep going. So I would make a motion that we put a 2-year moratorium on it. Maybe it'll be defeated when we yea or nay it. I don't know. Any second?
Any discussion?
Discussion. It's a possibility. Could we get a ruling on the facility whether it's 2 or 1 before we do that, that might help us out a little bit, I think. I don't know. Who would give a ruling on
Well,
the proliferation?
Proliferation.
Thank you.
I think maybe the first question is what you've said previously, is the need or desirability. And would you recommend to council that there is a need or desirability to name the terminal? If the answer is yes, then you have the 2 individuals that have been requested. If you want to select one of those, you could, or suggest that there be a process where other names, so that the community could know that the city council, if they were interested in naming the terminal, others would have the opportunity to suggest additional people to be considered, and council could set up a process for how those names are considered. I think, and city council can decide how they want on whether it's 1 building or 2. Whether I consider it 1 because it all functions together, but city council can. I don't think it's really a legal question. I mean, I guess we could get down to that, but really, I think it's more of a, how the 2 buildings function. But I think that is, I agree with Commissioner Miller, while it's an issue, it's not the prime issue.
Okay, I think there's a motion, but I'd like to amend the motion, if I could, pending the vote on whether it's necessary and needed.
I
Is it getting
If
too
I may,
confusing?
I think where we should start is simply, is this necessary? What is the vote on?
I agree, but I
Naming
don't
it.
know if there's a motion on the table. That's what
No,
I'm saying.
I guess
There's
there
a
is.
motion on it, but it hasn't been offered for second, so I don't know.
Okay.
Okay.
I think that would be a place to start, because if this body says no, it goes to city council with their recommendation, and we could attach to that, here's what we think. However, if you do decide to go on with this, we recommend that you come up with a system to broaden out the number of people, let them discuss it at their level.
Yeah, and given the passion and the opportunity here, I don't feel qualified tonight to close any of these opportunities.
Right.
And I might suggest as an alternative, given the time that we have allotted for this evening on this issue, and this is an alternative, this is not addressing the motion, but not to weasel out of this, but to really discuss the necessity and maybe have a committee meeting on this, to have a finding, develop points, counterpoints on whether there is a necessity. I don't know. I don't think so tonight, based on this information. But if I were going to make a recommendation, I mean, both of these gentlemen are their qualifications, I wouldn't know who to go with. But they're both deserving people, and is this the appropriate location? I don't know. But, I think we have to get back to the issue, is there a necessity? Is there something that's driving this decision tonight?
It was 30 years before they named the other one.
Your point's
So
well
I don't
taken.
think there's a necessity at this moment. And if I can, since no one seconded my motion, I assume it was dead. And I would like to go forward then with a motion to the city council saying that at this time, it's not necessary to name the terminal. And let the city council then take it, either if they wish to do it, they're free to go ahead with it. We just recommend.
Well, I would add to that, I think there is no ambiguity that this is the Santa Barbara Airport Terminal, unlike many of the fine parks that we're fortunate to have, where you can't just have a park with no name and, meet you at the park. I mean, we have to have names for parks. I don't think there's any ambiguity about the airport terminal. So I'm not certain that there's a necessity there myself. I think the director has already put forth a suggestion, And I would make a motion following or amending yours to find that there is not a necessity to name the terminal, but forward that to the city council and add that if it has the desire to name the terminal, that it should develop a process to help us evaluate to and possibly request additional submissions.
I think I said that in less words.
Yeah. Well, without the process as proposed by the
The
airport.
city council. whatever they
Yeah.
want. They can go ahead and name it right then and there.
Yeah.
I just want to
I would second
suggest-
that motion, if that's a motion.
That's a motion. Is that a
Would
motion?
the chair care to restate the motion in less words? I think it follows along very closely to suggestion 3 that the airport staff has put together, that we would make a recommendation to the council that there is not currently seen to be a necessity to name the building, but that if the city council has a desire to name the terminal, it should develop a process to consider the names currently submitted, as well as names of other individuals whose contributions to the community are consistent with the criteria outlined in Municipal Code 22.48.
I second it since I did it in the first place, but that's
There you go.
no. It's
And we have
Okay.
discussion,
Second it.
though, it's assumption that all of us are not wanting it to be named, I think, and that's in the way that's
No,
worded. But
well,
maybe we go down the
we're
line and
we're
ask
gonna-
where our position is
We're
before
going
we
to
do
vote
that.
on it.
You don't think so?
There's a motion on the
There's a motion on
floor.
it. We've got to act on the motion, and we can vote on it. That will tell you where everybody is.
Okay. I think the way the motion's worded, it states that we don't think that. I'm not
Well,
sure
the-
where everybody stands.
The point is, the motion has been made, and that's what we're going to, if it passes, that's what we tell them. If it doesn't, we don't.
Okay, point of order, that's all.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, could you restate the motion? So everybody's clear on what you're...
Yes, I can. Thank you, sir. The motion is that we make a recommendation to council that there is not a necessity to name the terminal. However, if council has a desire to name the terminal, the process should be established to consider the names of currently submitted as well as names of other individuals whose contributions to the community are consistent with the criteria outlined in Municipal Code 22.48. Basically, the language on the briefing, except should not be named, turns into there is not a necessity to.
Okay, great.
Okay? It's been moved and seconded.
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. I voted aye.
Ah, okay. Is that unanimous? I wasn't counting. Those against? It was unanimous. Usually happens faster than that. Okay.
So I will forward the recommendation to City Council and work with the City Administrator to schedule it for a council meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, and I hope they are able to use that as an opportunity to really broaden people's awareness of the contributions of both of these individuals, which are tremendous to the community. And I hope that many of our speakers tonight have an opportunity to present more of that information both to the council and to the community through the media, perhaps, because it's an important discussion to have, even if this isn't inevitably named after anyone. I think they're both very deserving, and perhaps there are other facilities, as was suggested, that may be even more fitting for some of those individuals.
I agree. I also want to mention that, or re-mention, I guess, that when we have finished the 1942 terminal, that there will be a history display that will be rotated out. And I know that I have spoken with Dennis Ricard, Judge Ricard's son, and he has voice recordings and all kinds of materials that would be very interesting to people to learn about Judge Ricard. And the same with Dwight Murphy. Mr. Hartfeld has photos, as he mentioned, the statue, and I'm working with City TV about doing video of the history of the airport and interviewing people that have been significant in its development, which certainly these two individuals would be. So, in my view, that's a very meaningful way for people in the community as well as visitors to know the contributions of these two individuals as well as others that may have made contributions.
Please don't forget those that flew airplanes. There's
I
quite a
won't.
number of them around here.
I won't,
Quite
certainly
a
won't.
history of the aircraft.
Right, I agree.
I've had a request from one of the members if we can take a short break before we get to the next report.
Well, mine was a question if it would like to take a break.
Well, okay.
Before we
We'll
go
make
to
it a
the next
request.
Sure. Bye. Mhm.
See ya. Let's do 5 minutes or so.
History is fascinating.
Item 10.
Yeah, I'm lost here. Ah, yes.
Which I think I will do.
Okay.
Oh, gosh.
Item 10.
Good
Ms.
evening.
Johns.
Item 10 is that commission receive a report on the status of the department's budget as of December 31, mid-year review. As you mentioned earlier, the Budget Subcommittee met on the 10th of February and reviewed the report that has been submitted tonight. I'd just like to briefly make some points on our where we stand with the budget, and then also discuss some adjustments that are needed, which is sort of unusual for the airport. When we put the budget together, as you'll recall, we were looking at a year where we had flat passenger traffic. Actually, we were up like 1% or 0.1% in passenger traffic. So we made projections based on the construction of the new terminal, when it would be completed, when we would occupy. We also had negotiated with the airlines for new rates and charges, or we're in the midst of negotiating with the airlines for rates and charges, one of which was a boarding bridge fee, in addition to building rental and landing fee. And then, of course, we had new concessions going into the terminal. All of those numbers were predicated on being in and occupying the building by the end of June. Certainly that didn't happen. We came in the middle of August, so we're already 2 months pretty much behind in projected revenues. Even with that, our total revenues for the first 6 months of the year, our operating revenues, not including capital, but operation revenues, were up 1.7% overall. Our expenses, we were also making projections as to how much we would use in materials and supplies for the new building. We knew that we had contracts on the equipment, the escalators and the elevators and boarding bridges that were under warranty, and we had bid maintenance contracts along with the cost of the equipment. So we really weren't worried about that part. And we were guessing on utilities because it's a substantially 3 times bigger building than the old terminal. Well, I'm pleased to say that our operating revenues are below budget, 8.6%. That's a good thing because we have our first debt service payment due on June 30th. So the first one will be June 30th of this year. And I believe at this point we will have sufficient revenues to have a good year and also pay our debt service, which is important. We do have recommendations tonight, though, for some adjustments to the budget that were necessary due to some circumstances with projects that we had agreed to fund and then others that have come up since the budget was submitted. The existing projects that we have in our capital plan include an agreement with between the city and the Goleta Sanitary District for the plant upgrade. We went to council, I believe, several years ago, since we are a member of the district, and any improvements at the district, we need to contribute 2.84% of the total cost. So when that project was under design, we had a line item in our capital budget that covered it. But then construction started, and now construction is anticipated to be completed within the next 12 months to 14 months. And we need to do an allocation, increase our allocation for that particular project, $767,000. Additionally, we have mitigation on our airfield safety projects. And when we received approval of those projects, the mitigation was 4-1, with also a commitment that we maintain it for 7 years. And federal grants were available for the construction of the projects, as well as 3 years of the maintenance. The balance of the maintenance period falls to the airport. And we closed out our last grant, so now the airport needs to pick up the balance of the contracts, existing contracts for this fiscal year, and that's a little over $500,000. And then I need my report, I guess. The next project is what was it? I have it. Excuse me while I look at my. Oh, the airline terminal. How could I forget that? When we put our budget together for the terminal project, we had bonds as a revenue source. We also had AIP grants from FAA, Airport Improvement Program grants, passenger facility charge, some revenue, and then, of course, airport funds. Because Congress took 5 years or more to reauthorize FAA funding, and we operated on extending resolutions, our funding didn't come in from FAA as timely as we needed. The contracts were needed, however, so airport funds just picked that up and kept it going. But we need to cover that overage as well, and that, too, is a little over $500,000. As to new projects, several years ago we put in automated equipment in the parking lots, thinking that it would be efficient and operational, and we would not have to have the parking lots manned. That hasn't worked out to our dismay, based on weather, based on the type of equipment, the digital process. So we do need to have staff in the parking facility. So we are in the short-term parking lot, originally designed, did not have a kiosk for exiting. We need that, and so we are requesting that $120,000 be put in as a new line item in the budget to accommodate the construction of a new kiosk in a short-term parking lot at the terminal. Additionally, we need equipment, the same equipment in all 3 of our lots for the short-term lot. The equipment is $250,000. That needs to be added to our budget. And then the last item, we have some buildings on the airport that are in disrepair and have become safety issues and nuisance. So we'd like to start a line item for building demolition, and that's $130,000. Overall, it's $2.3 million, all of which will be funded from airport reserves above policy. And that is the completion of my, what else? It's my glasses. Let me put it on. And I mentioned the Airport Commission Budget Subcommittee met on February 10th and received the report and recommended, well, there was no recommendation. They just received the report on February 10th. So that concludes staff report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Well, let me start with saying thank you for this great report. Do I understand that you're asking us for a recommendation tonight to, you stated at one point you were looking for a recommendation, and the report itself says you are recommending an increase in appropriations, but you're not coming to ask us for that. this evening?
No, that was, it's more of a receive a report from staff on the budget and the adjustments that were submitted to City Council for their consideration, since it was part of the city's overall review of all budgets, and that was for City Council.
Okay, great, yeah. Well, that is what the agenda item was. It was simply to receive a report, but you made a statement a few minutes ago about a recommendation for adjustments.
True.
So.
Sorry about that.
Thank you. I'll just say, yeah, we spent our usual amount of effort nitpicking things at the subcommittee report, and we're actually
Asking pointed questions.
No, really appreciate all the work that goes into it, and as always, you're just doing a tremendous job of containing costs and managing to deal with a lot of unpredictability.
Thank you.
And I think we were all.
I have a question.
Going
Just
well.
when you're finished. Sorry. The expenditures, everything's going in the right direction. What is that number total? And so when you're going to ask for your appropriation minus that savings, it really, my question is kind of leading to the point that it doesn't come up to as much as you're actually asking for, because you've saved all this over here. Have you looked at it that way? Maybe my question is not real clear.
The changes that we're asking, the adjustments for the capital fund, those are being funded from our reserves above policy.
Different fund?
Different fund.
It's not
Totally.
reflected in the
It's not
savings.
operational, because as you recall, the way in which we get funds for capital is if we generate revenues in excess of our operating budget, then it falls to the bottom line, and then at that point, we decide on our capital program and fund it from those reserves, while we maintain fully funded reserves based on council policy.
I see.
So we had sufficient reserves in excess of $2.3 million. And those monies were sitting there available for this use for capital. And so that's what we did. Does that make sense?
Yes. So, and we showed a gain of 1,300,057 and change.
Currently, that's as
from
of
the
December.
savings and operating.
Mm-hmm.
And I also want to make one more comment, because I remember we went to the year-end budget before, we had a couple categories that were not in line with the rest, and I noticed the ARF is right on budget, which is nice to see, because that was one of those categories that was
At the end of the
Control.
fiscal year, there's usually a true-up with ARF.
Yeah.
So if there is an overage, that's when it happens.
Oh, okay.
Because it's on target because the city takes 1/12 out of the budget each month to cover the cost of ARF.
So we really don't know about that till the very end.
We'll have a meeting, I'm sure. We usually get a call.
Just want to add a comment. Being at that subcommittee meeting, we did talk at a very, on the low level, high level, and I'm satisfied, representing council, that the fiscal house here is well managed. It's the outlook I'm concerned about on revenue sources. That this is different than a private sector. That this is our mission is to keep the airport running regardless. Mm-hmm. And there's just so much that the airlines will pay. Mm-hmm. They're under tremendous pressure to keep costs down, and I think it's important for a liaison to appreciate that the airports are not on long-term contracts. They can pull their stakes up in 30 days' notice. And so we literally find out the same time you do, within hours, that someone's pulling out of a major market, and our revenues go down accordingly. So it's I don't know how many years I've been a participant here, but I find that dynamic incredible when you look at the size of the operation here and how you plan for something like that on forces that are beyond your control. This is different than a shopping center where you've got 5, 10, 15-year leases, and then smaller ones with the mom and pops. So I'm not tooting your own horn. You don't need me to, but I'm just always amazed at how you balance all this. But I'm also, it's a little sobering when you look at those revenue sources that you do manage differently than the airport, specifically the parking revenue. I think that's something that we all have to take a hard look at on the outlook for that, because the parking demand is going down as our rates are going up. It's one of those things. So I'd be willing to work with staff in any regard. I think there are opportunities to create more revenues, nothing immediate, but I think our situation here is no different than the waterfront and other enterprises. There's a lot of pressure to be self-sustaining, but I think the dynamic here at the airport, providing a public mission, public service for a region where the primary revenues are beyond our control, are challenging. And I want to commend staff for the excellent job that you do. That's it. Get off my
that
high
topic,
horse.
I think it's worth, again, reminding ourselves and everyone that a big part of your revenue is also the commercial
enterprise,
commercial industrial space and the leases there, and your real estate group continues to do a phenomenal job of
beyond
keeping
phenomenal.
It's at 99 point something % leased, and you are also looking at opportunities to develop additional lease capacity there to help look forward in that direction.
Immediately jumping on this because I feel really remiss in complimenting you, Rebecca, for an excellent job on the property management side. I mean, this is what I'm supposed to be doing here, and the rents that you're getting there are, it's amazing. The occupancy levels are great. There are additional opportunities to bring in additional revenues, rental revenues, but it's going to take time. And if anything, that's going to be really where it's going to come from. It's the commercial side, not the terminal. And I know that one of the challenges that we talked about at the committee level is, the what do you call them? The walkways that go out to
jet bridges.
Jet bridges, yeah. I think that's a fantastic issue that we're dealing with, where we have an infrastructure, the airlines, they don't want to pay for it. But yet, it's there, and they want to pay on a usage basis. And so it's quite a challenge.
But I will say that the passengers love them.
Oh, I'm sure they do. Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
No, that's all right. Mr. Lincoln.
Let's say, just
Susie.
preface. At a previous meeting, I think it was Commissioner Gilbert, anyway, the commission had requested that we brief the full commission on where we were with the proposed ground transportation program, just the work that the subcommittee has been working on. So Tracy's prepared a very brief update.
But informative.
Great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will be brief.
Or Hazel, kick him.
A little bit of background, just to give the commission members that aren't on the subcommittee an idea of the size of the ground transportation system. We currently have 9 permitted on-demand taxi cab companies that operate 2 cabs each for a total of 18. They pay $150 a month each for the privilege to operate those 2 permitted vehicles, $18,000 total revenue. We have 1 on-demand shuttle. We get $3,600 revenue. They operate 2 shuttles. And we have last revised the taxi cab rules and procedures in 2001, so it's been over 10 years. No new taxi cab operators have been issued airport permits since 2001, so it's basically been a closed market. The existing program conflicts with city ordinance in that city ordinance requires permits for all commercial vehicles that pickup at the airport, and because we've not had literally the infrastructure space, we've allowed a lot of limos, courtesy vehicles, and non-permitted cabs that are not on demand to pick up. And then the inadequate infrastructure. So as far as updating the program, two things kind of play into the timing. We revised the airport's Title 18 of the city ordinance, which created a new section that gave this commission the right to we develop and recommend a program that's adopted by council, and then via the director of the commission kind of administers the program. Gives us a little more flexibility without needing to go back to council as frequently. And obviously the infrastructure was improved greatly so that we now have a dedicated commercial lane so we can provide some permits and parking spaces for the other vehicles. In creating a new ground transportation program, we want to improve the customer service to the passenger, the provider, and develop a comprehensive program that contains the policies, fees, and procedures to promote safety and good service for all categories of commercial ground transportation providers. So real quick, the objectives in developing such a program, we want them to be compliant with all the federal and state laws. We want to significantly improve the standard of our on-demand taxi cab service. We do intend to require permits for all commercial ground transportation activity. Gets us in compliance with city ordinance. We're coming up with some extra regs for driver accountability as well as company. We will implement security improvements, customer communication so we can communicate with the folks that are being transported, get additional feedback. Customer service will be improved. We were going to develop a system that we can get operational data about the use of the roadway, though there will be reporting requirements. Right now we have almost none. Due process currently, director has final say, no due process. City attorney did not like that, and the new ordinance has due process, and the city council will be the hearing body for that. Get some market rate fees. We're under market right now. Look at sustainability issues as far as incentives for green operations, and then just coming up with a better way to monitor, manage, and enforce the program. That's kind of the goals of the new program. We had a taxi cab meeting. A couple of the subcommittee members were able to attend. We had good attendance, and we got a lot of good input. They're a very vocal group. Overall, there was a preference for an open system. There's a lot of reasons for that. We have a lot of small cab operators, and their concern is a competitive system where you go with a request for proposal. They would not be able to meet the service level requirements and the investment that's in the room. The small ones wanted open. The bigger ones were more for an RFP, but there's many more small operators, so overall it was an open. I mentioned we got a lot of concurrence on what I was looking for their input on. Is it too much for us to require credit card machines in the cabs? What do you think about the dress code? I got their input on many service level improvements, and they were surprisingly cooperative on the lion's share of them. There was no objection to requiring permits for other operators. I've had many limo operators call me, wondering when we're going to have the permit program. And all of the cab companies that were in the room that are not on-demand cab companies, they did not have a problem with being required a permit. Their concern, and I'll be bringing the recommendations to the subcommittee, but their concern is, do we have to permit each vehicle, or will you permit our company and allow us to? So those wrinkles need to be ironed out, and I will work on that with the subcommittee. And then there was complete concurrence on the adoption and implementation of a per-trip fee. They're very common at airports throughout the country, and it's a very good way to pay for the person, a monitor, a city employee, to be out there managing the system and enforcing the system without raising the cost of the permits to the point where a cab company cannot afford them. So those were the kind of the bullet points that we were looking for consensus on and got them. The next, the subcommittee members can expect a call next week. We're trying to schedule another meeting. We're pretty much ready. We will be speaking with them about the type of permit system that we're going to recommend. I know that at this point the city has indicated that they have an open system and they would like to see us remain consistent with the city's open system. We will both recommend the type of permit system for on-demand cabs and prearranged cabs. We will make a recommendation to the subcommittee on the level of fees for permits and agreements for the different type of operators. And then we will get with the subcommittee about what we would like to recommend as required service levels in any new cab agreement, so that the subcommittee can expect to hear that. We have 2 industry meetings might be optimistic. It may take a meeting or 2 more, but we will have another meeting with the cabs after the subcommittee meeting to go over those results and recommendations of the subcommittee. And I will be holding an additional meeting with the limos and the courtesy vehicles to speak with them about our intent to implement a permit, the proposed fees, and get their input. And that would conclude the report.
Yes, you may.
Have a number of discussions lately with some of these cab companies about a franchise agreement downtown to try to limit this.
Yeah, excuse me, and if you could introduce yourself.
Yes. Randy Rouse, City Council Liaison to the Airport Commission. Mr. Chair, if I may, there's been a number of discussions lately and have been in the past years about limiting the number of cabs downtown or creating a franchise agreement because currently there's probably 63 to 65 different cab companies operating independently downtown. And why this is salient to the Airport Commission, in my opinion, is that what we're trying to create is a professional experience for our visitors coming into town. It should be consistent. It should be consistent with the city itself, even though it's a multi-regional service. I would be interested, if you wouldn't mind, in being noticed on your subcommittee meeting to attend it, because I think that might be valuable for me to garner the information as we are in ongoing meetings with these different cab companies. Currently, the city may or may not be in favor of this. I'm not really sure. I haven't talked with the city administrator at length with this. But I have to say, anecdotally, to me it makes sense as I witness kind of a rogue atmosphere downtown, especially on the weekends with these different cab companies competing. And I would like to have, when a visitor comes into Santa Barbara in our airport, the most ultimate professional experience there is with consistency and the type of lasting experience that they would say, yes, I'm here, I'm coming back here for either business or pleasure. So I would appreciate being part of that dialogue. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we would certainly endorse that and ask that the city have a liaison appointed to that committee.
Aren't we bound by the city's policies and so forth as far as our discussions and working with cab companies? In other words, their ordinances or our ordinances, or do we do something different?
We do have a set of operating rules that are specific to the airport. Cabs need to be compliant with all of the city requirements, but the airport also has separate requirements.
Over and above the cities. Over and above the city's requirements. The airport has requirements. And quite frankly, I think ours are more stringent than the cities. And we have staff that are out there dealing, because the cabs are parked at the curb, whereas the city, they're all over the place. Right. So I think it would be great to work together, and because certainly that's what we want here is a professional group of ground transportation operators taking our visitors to and from the airport and throughout the city. We've had some pretty bad experiences lately amongst the cabs and shuttle drivers competing for business, and it reduced to fisticuffs in the terminal lobby a few weeks ago, and we dealt with that swiftly with the parties. But anyway, they're just even though we have more control than the city in general does, I think we need to even tighten it up a bit.
If I could, there's nothing more I can add other than underscoring a need for the enforceability of any ordinance and the funding mechanism behind it. I'll leave that to you all to develop, and I agree with everything you said about the consistency and the appearance and the professionalism, the experience and all that. I also want to add, as you normally would, and we rely on you all to, in developing a recommendation, is to bring the best practices from other airports, similar size, similar situations, what have you, and so we're not reinventing the wheel. But agree with everything that's been said here tonight.
I have a lot of stats from other airports and how they do it, and I can certainly present that to the subcommittee as well.
The best of, yeah. Right.
Yeah, I know in the first subcommittee meeting we had, anytime a government organization looks to expand a program, we all kind of wonder, are they, is there really a necessity in doing it? Because I think many of us have the philosophy the government should be doing what's necessary and no more. And I think you've clearly demonstrated that it's a matter of necessity, security, public convenience, and that expanding the program and bringing in additional controls is certainly that. And I think it's important to help everybody understand that this isn't just, it's not a way to make more money. It most certainly is not. It's about order, and certainly an airport of all places has additional requirements to maintain that sort of order. And again, the service, the quality, the public perception, all very important. But kind of last is about revenue. It's not that.
It's not a big revenue source.
No. It's a drain, maybe. You ready for the director's report?
Yes, please.
You've waited all night for this, I know.
Yes, I have.
I'll only point out 2 items. I'll be very quick. Passenger count for January was down 1.2% over January of last year. Hoping that, maybe we're seeing some slowing down of the loss and will even out. On June 4th, Alaska Airlines will begin their Portland service, and that will last until August. So I'm hopefully it'll be a very successful service, which will demonstrate to Alaska that we do have the market here that we tell them that we have. I understand that the pre-reservations are going really well, so Alaska's very pleased with that, and we'll be doing a big marketing campaign to roll out the service and give them a lot of exposure. So, and I firmly believe that when you get new service, it attracts more people to use the airport. So generally in the past, that's proved true. We'll see if it proves true with this. So that's all I'm going to pull off my director's report. So if you have any other items that are on there you would like me to speak to, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, and you mentioned marketing. I was just curious how your marketing program is doing with the departure of your marketing specialist. How are you adapting to that?
Well, since Terry retired, we have, and will be shortly, contracting with a local marketing firm, Idea Engineering, to assist with our marketing, kind of look at our marketing program and make sure we're getting the best bang for our buck, and promoting ourselves as much as we should. Sometimes we're a little more conservative or pull back and don't really market ourselves as much as we probably should to have people pay attention to our ads. And I don't mean that in a spectacular sense, but not be quite so conservative. So they'll be working with us on that. They'll be interviewing some stakeholders and users to kind of get a sense of, why they use the airport, what we can do in terminal, and what we can do to enhance their experience.
And if they don't use the airport, why are they not using the airport?
Right.
So this is an assessment?
An assessment, and also looking back, sort of a fresh look, because we've had consistency in our marketing for the last 15 years, and it's just a new opportunity to have an outsider sit in and take a look and then give us some additional information.
And Idea Engineering came with very good references. And we did do an RFP process and selected Idea Engineering. So we'll be looking at that. We've, with Terry's departure, we also have bumped up the activity of Kevin Shore, who's our airline service development consultant, and trying to see really how we should kind of structure our marketing division, which is really 2 people, to be most effective. So stay tuned.
Thank you very much.
On the subject of marketing, I saved this, and I meant to bring it in, but I'll just probably bring it by the office for you guys. About a week ago, there was a flyer for LAX in the Bradley terminal. It was done very well, and I thought that it might be a good source for ideas.
Great.
For our terminal as our project goes forward. And I think their publication went out in the Times on a Sunday. So it was circulated to a large population. But I was very impressed with the way the pamphlet was put together and how it covered different ideas and aspects and jobs and things.
Excellent.
Great.
Yeah, we
So
always
I'm
like
giving
to
that to
get
you.
examples that are
Yeah.
good. Great, thanks.
Anything else?
One other thing, and I know it's been a long meeting, but I think it's good for anyone who's interested in GA. Atlantic Aviation now has bicycles for the public to use, no charge, instead of a courtesy car.
Oh, great.
So if the public flies in, they can take the bike down to the beach.
Excellent.
Go green.
They still have it, but I guess the demand is beyond. So.
Signature's got a Mustang convertible now. If you want to go quickly to the beach.
Signature will need some bikes, too.
Yes,
Greenly to the beach.
We'll put them on that. Without any further, we're adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.